Welcome to the Savvy Shopkeeper Retail Podcast. I'm your host, Kathy Cruz. I'm a former brick and mortar store owner turned retail expert who is passionate about entrepreneurship and has experienced the highs and lows of running a retail business. Whether you're a seasoned retail veteran or an aspiring store owner, consider me your guide on this store owning journey. If you're looking to run a profitable and growing business that doesn't drain you, follow my 6 stages of shopkeeping and subscribe to this show. Join me for a journey of continuous learning where protecting your mind, maximizing profit, and determining your own schedule are a priority. Get ready to work smarter, profit more, and grow your retail business. Welcome to episode 238 of the Savvy Shopkeeper Retail Podcast. I'm your host, Kathy Cruz. Well, it's 2025. Happy New Year to everyone. It's still kind of settling in my brain that it's a new year and 2024 went by so fast. I hope everyone's doing well. I hope you're rested from the holiday season. And to kick off 2025, Sari, a longtime member of Master Shopkeepers, and this is an interesting tidbit. She's a former radio personality. That's kind of cool, right? She asked if she could interview me for this podcast. She asked this after I interviewed her, and you can listen to her episode. It's episode 231. I'll be honest, I thought about asking Sari to actually interview me, so it's just kind of funny how it all worked out. And I thought about it for a long time, but I didn't because I had mixed feelings about this. I feel like I already share so much on this podcast about me. I focus on creating content that serves you, the brick and mortar store owner, but I do sprinkle in my own lessons learned, my journey, some of my own stories. When I do, it always feels incredibly vulnerable. If you've been listening since the beginning, you know some of those personal moments have been raw and at times emotional. And I knew getting interviewed would feel the same way, but this is episode number 238. And I didn't look back, but I think I'm 5 years into this podcasting thing. And I thought, why not? Maybe you do want to hear a little bit more about me. And bless you for thinking that. I joke all the time and say that no one wants to experience what happens in this brain of mine, but here we go. This interview is definitely longer than I expected. So we've split it into 2 episodes because I know so many of you appreciate that I value your time. Throughout the interview, you'll hear some things that I've shared on previous podcast episodes, I'm sure, but you'll hear in this first part of the interview that Sari explained to me why these 2 episodes might be helpful to you, the people who listen to this podcast, because you're going to be able to hear it all packaged together, along with maybe some of those new tidbits. So here's part 1 of my own interview. It sounds so weird to say that.
Hi, Kathy. This is a fun day. I love that you're willing to turn the tables and to sit on the other side of the virtual Zoom meeting and let me ask you some questions. We get to hear so much from you about your life, but it's on your terms. And so it's fun to bring you some questions that come from your Master Shopkeepers community and just from my questions that I've had for you over the years and to put them all together today.
Well, thank you. Thank you for offering to do this. Although I told you I had considered it before, but was waiting to ask. I had 3 people in mind in terms of if there was a time where it made sense to interview me. So I was really happy when you reached out and offered. But then there was also that part of me, and I mentioned this before we pressed record, that I thought, well, what could anyone ask me that I haven't already shared? So I am curious what you're going to ask. Maybe a little nervous.
Don't be nervous. So that's interesting because I don't know that I have anything here that you haven't gotten to cover somewhere before. So maybe this is just more of kind of gathering up a lot of your thoughts into one place because we now have years of podcasts with you. The folks in the Master Shopkeepers community have, we have our coaching that happens in there and our master classes that happen in there. And our live, not recorded calls that happen where you just get to share off the cuff. Then everyone who's in your community has access to, your Instagram posts where you share all kinds of little snippets of things that are great, but it's all spread out. And I think it'll be fun to gather up some of that into one conversation today and see really just what's a snapshot of today. This isn't a reflection on like your whole life, and you're not glued to anything you say today for the rest of time. It's just a snapshot of where you're at professionally and a little bit personally, on as much as you're comfortable sharing, just a snapshot of who Kathy Cruz is today. So I love being a part of that. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's a great point. It's something I didn't consider.
I'm curious when I think of the master shopkeepers community in particular, but your podcast as a whole, I think of you as such a generous, welcoming presence who never makes those of us who are early in our stages feel like we don't know something yet. And yet, at the same time, you somehow keep it high level enough that those of us who have been doing things for a while also feel welcome. I find that to be really, really inclusive and unusual. I listen to lots of other things, and I read other books, and you're not the only person that I look to for business advice, but it's a unique take on it. And so you are the one that I return to literally every day, the only one that I give that much attention to for sure. It's like, how do you include so well? How do you bring in everyone? Have you always been an includer? Like as a kid, if you go back that far, were you naturally an includer when you were little, or were you somebody who was left out and you don't ever want anybody else to feel that way? Like how did you get to this?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. I think there were so many times in my life that I didn't feel included. Not I think, I know. So, particularly, it started more so in high school when I was really outside of my comfort zone and outside of my norm, which was an urban inner city girl who listened to rap and R&B and merengue and salsa, and then not thrown into, it was a very intentional choice on my part. But then I attended a high school that was predominantly all white females from wealthy communities. And that was a moment where I realized, wow, that I'm not always included. I don't always feel included. I felt really outside of my comfort zone. And there were a lot of socioeconomic reasons, on occasion, some racism. So yeah, and then just going into adulthood and then working in a career that was mostly male dominated and being the minority there, plus being a Latina woman and being a minority there. So there are lots of times that I felt I wasn't included. So inclusivity is extremely important to me.
I love that. I think you've done a great job of recalibrating all of that in our group to make sure that none of us have to experience that. So that's really powerful. So you did mention slightly, you said in a male dominated career. So just as a quick reminder, law enforcement. Did you know from the get-go in law enforcement that you would go down the detective path, or did that evolve based on your personal skills and interests? Did someone else identify that in you, or did you ask to go that path? How did it happen?
I think some people would describe me as like high achiever, although I feel like there's still so much I want to achieve. So I feel like you put me in any setting and I'm going to challenge myself and I'm going to want more and I'm going to want to learn more and be more. So I think that was the natural path. The interesting thing to me is another natural path could have been becoming a supervisor. And I never chose that path. And that was very telling to me. But I also knew 5 years in that law enforcement wasn't going to be my long-term path. It ended up being the case. It ended up being another 15 years before I made a decision about it to leave. So, detective was one path that I could take, and I knew I would take that path. The next one would have been supervisor. And when I kept passing up the opportunity to do that, it just became more and more telling to me.
I like that. The detective thing makes so much sense for all of us who know you now on this side of that experience because you're always asking more questions and drawing out more things, trying to connect dots for us that maybe we don't see. Do you see yourself doing that all of the time naturally? Are you just a dot connector all the time?
Oh, that's a good question. Yes, I guess yes. Now that you ask it that way, I would say yes. I think what I feel what I do really well is I can listen to someone for even a full hour on a call, like a one-on-one client, and it's our first call. And at the end, they always say to me, I feel like I just dumped on you. And I say that the dumping process is my favorite because that's where I take all my notes. And that's where I really start to connect the dots. So yes, that just came full circle for me. Yeah, I do it in a lot of other ways. Yeah, I don't know if it's just a natural skill because I worked in law enforcement for 20 years or if it's a natural skill that I just have. I'm not sure.
I bet you succeeded in law enforcement for so long because that's just who you are, that you piece those things together well. I suspect. Who can say?
Yeah, and I say, in terms of my law enforcement career, I was good at what I did. Was I great or the best? No. But I also don't, I think it's because I wasn't in my zone of genius and it just wasn't going to be that way. I think I did a nice job. I think I performed well. I think I brought peace to, families and closure, but I know I wasn't the best. There were so many other people that I admired who did the job better than I did.
That's an interesting point to the zone of genius. I think lots of us have so appreciated learning that language because it explains so much for all of us why high achieving people can do well at something but not be satisfied or feel peace with what they're doing. I started listening to you in 2021 and I have seen you evolve so much in that time, which that's what, just a little over 3 years. I feel like I've seen you evolve so much in both the podcast and in keeper community. And really, I'm not even sure if evolve is the right word for it. I think it's more, I've gotten to see you continue to step into who you really are. And so that mention of the zone of genius, not law enforcement not being that for you, even though you were a high achiever, even though you did so well, there and you did continue to expand your skills and grow for you long term. And so then to see in these last few years how you've continued to step into this person that you're clearly meant to be and who you really are, what what kinds of things do you do in your personal time? Because obviously you're looking at data and all of that. That's the nuts and bolts of it. But one could learn how to do that part. What are you doing with just your personal time and your thoughts that give you that confidence to continue to step into who you are?
Hmm, that's a good question. Two things come to mind is working with a coach myself. That I would say is probably what you've witnessed over the past 3 years is me working with a coach to unpack so much of my own brain, my thoughts, the programmed and systemic things that I was battling and just kind of suppressing. And I've touched on this on the podcast episode so many things. And I felt like the more I suffocated that or the more I suppressed it and didn't deal with it, the more it was going to keep me from becoming who I wanted to be. And I really saw that in the pandemic and I decided to do something about it. And I think I've touched on this on the podcast too, but making that type of investment, especially for someone like me coming from money scarcity, it was a 5-figure investment, was terrifying. But I was at a point in my life and in this entrepreneurial path that I thought it's now. It's time to do this now. It's time to get really uncomfortable, to shed all the tears, to feel the discomfort, to release so many things that were holding me back so that I could not be stuck anymore. And that's exactly what it was, like just getting all of that out and seeing it and addressing it and replacing it with new thoughts and a new path. And that for sure is the reason I've transformed over the past 3 years. So special shout out to Neil. She never takes credit. She always gives me credit. But Neil, my own coach, has been really like important part of that journey. And then I would say the other thing, which is like so simple, is me going for walks. I really unpack my own brain, do some self-coaching, have lots of conversations with myself. But the my favorite thing that happens from me going for a long walk are the ideas, or that's where the dots do start to connect, where I start to see things. Because if I'm in front of my laptop or I'm somewhere just doing the work and I'm in the work, I don't see the big picture. But when I'm walking, I can see the big picture because I don't have a laptop and I don't have the work in front of me. Does that make sense? So, like me walking just really clears my brain and it lets all of the magic flow in.
I think that makes so much sense. I think it's a perfect example for shopkeepers too, because our days can be completely filled with tasks. And if we choose to spend all of our time on that, we're going to miss some really, really important things that might either make those tasks easier or maybe eliminate some of them entirely because we would have better focus and better clarity. So I love hearing what you do to get that kind of clarity. That's really helpful. So, Kathy, I want to shift gears just a little bit about disappointment, which that's never my favorite topic to talk about. I bet it's not yours either. But I wondered if you would be willing to share some of the disappointments that you can see have shaped you as you've gone along this path. Those can be business disappointments, personal disappointments, maybe business first. And then if there's a personal
Hmm.
disappointment that you're willing to talk about, I think it would help us understand more about the resilience and what you've come through to share the advice that you share and to get to where you are.
Yeah. Oh, goodness. That's a good one. Let's start with personal disappointment so I can just get that one out of the way. I would say, I never feel disappointment about how I was raised. Like, Mamita is incredible. She raised us so well. Even a single parent who barely spoke English, who had a disease that kept her in and out of the hospital all the time. We didn't have a lot of money. I mean, we didn't have any money, really. I never think of that as like, oh, that kept me from so much. If anything, it probably drove me more. Personal disappointments, being abandoned by my father is a personal disappointment. But every year on Father's Day, I call Mamita and wish her happy Father's Day every year and never miss. So, in that respect, I'm just incredibly grateful that I had this really strong mother who didn't have a lot of education, but she's wise. And some people would look at her and maybe not think that, but I could sit at the kitchen table with her and have really deep conversations, just her and I. And she has a really good intuition when it comes to people, and she has the most loving heart. And then the other thing I would say in terms of disappointment, and I don't know if it's disappointment because this came up in Master Shopkeepers when you asked for questions, to in order to do this episode, and the one about infertility came up. And I don't know if that's disappointment. It depends on the day, right? Sometimes I can look at that as disappointment, and sometimes I can look at that as it's what was meant to be, and who knows why. But the question was like, how did I overcome that? And when I actually sat there and thought about that question, it was, I haven't, and I don't know if I ever will, and I think that's going to be okay. I have moments where I'm okay with it. I manage it okay. And then I have moments that I don't manage it well, where it's just heartbreaking. So I would say those are probably the personal ones. Professional. I don't know. I can't really think of a disappointment. And maybe it's my perspective and I recently wrote, like, jotted down a note for a future episode on this topic. I think I've learned that what I really want to enjoy is the journey and not the accomplishment. So we often set revenue goals or big goals, or think that that's what's going to define us. And I've learned, I think, especially through I think Master Shopkeepers has taught me this. The relationships I've built in there is I really want to work on enjoying the journey. So, how do I make that feel good? And yes, I want to set big goals. I have big goals and I want to do all of those things and I want to hit revenue numbers. But what I really want to do is just enjoy the path. But that takes so much longer than the moment where you hit that accomplishment and that passes. But the journey is long. So I want to enjoy that.
I love that because you're right. As soon as we hit a goal, it's been hit. It's that is just one tiny moment.
And I think that's what people think will make them happy, will be hitting the goal. They don't realize that it's actually the journey or who they become or how they evolve and all the things that they learn that actually is what brings people joy. So if I can find that and hit the goal, perfect.
Yes, definitely. Still hit the goal. I like
Yes.
it. That's great. So that leads us in nicely then to think about how do you define success? I feel like you have just halfway answered that already.
Yeah, I have learned that defining success for me is, am I in alignment? So that means time management. That means time with family. That means serving my community. That means, and I know people hate the word balance. Maybe it's a juggling. I don't even think it's a juggling act. I use the word balance and I'm just going to own it, balancing it all and creating the balance that makes me the most happy. So if I go back to my law enforcement years, especially those years when I was in the homicide unit, that was incredibly challenging. And the funny thing is I just recorded that podcast episode about perimenopause. And when I looked back, I saw that I was vitamin deficient because I was working so much and I was constantly inside in a car, in a house, in the police headquarters. It really became clear to me, of course I was, and I'm not vitamin deficient now because I'm outside and I go walking and I take vacations. So for me, it's about making sure that I am aligned with my values and maybe a little bit paired with hitting those goals.
That's great. I know you've talked a lot about boundaries before. Earliest episodes was about boundaries. And I think that that episode aired pretty close to the time that you announced on your podcast that you had just gotten married. So is that 2019? Does that sound like the right time frame in
Yes.
there?
And my husband and I joke
Okay.
all the time. We don't know what anniversary we're approaching, but we are. We're actually taking a vacation together, just him and I, to celebrate 5 years. So yes,
Good.
it
Good,
was
good,
19.
good. Because you were together a while before that, right?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect. So yeah, so right in the kind of right now the halfway point of your savvy shopkeeper life, though obviously that is going to go on, later on we'll look back at it and you got married at the beginning of it, but at the moment, it's kind of that halfway point. So boundaries are such an interesting thing to me. A lot of things in your life changed from having, a newer relationship and having a bonus son and all of that. I think part of your success is your great boundaries and how you do that. But can you tell us a little bit more? Like how do you not internalize what other people expect or think of you? How do you stay focused? And not just in life, but business expectations, life expectations. How do you stay focused on your own path when there's so many other people at play?
And that's probably the core of what I've worked on over the past 3 years. When I say I started working with a coach and I really started learning about myself, I learned two things. I blamed people for, and you wouldn't see this on the surface. No one would ever have known that, I don't think, where I blamed other people throughout my whole life for where I was and for not feeling in alignment, until I really took control of that and saw, no, this is on me. I have control of my whole entire life and control of the boundaries that I set. And I had to learn that I couldn't continue on this path as a people pleaser. So I had to really work on that. And that meant setting boundaries. And sometimes that meant setting boundaries for myself, like not just boundaries for other people, but boundaries for me. Sometimes that meant pausing to see, was I blaming someone else? Meaning, where I had some of the systemic thinking that I grew up with, that money was evil. That's something that I really had to battle. It also explains why I lived in money scarcity for so long, because I actually had a really abundant mindset where I thought, I don't have to be limited by a government job in terms of my salary. I knew I was capable of so much more. And I kind of had to break free from that, thinking that that was what would create my salary. It was like just putting a ceiling on myself. So I wanted to break free of that. That's just one example. But I just had to spend a lot of time and then a lot of self coaching. Like, am I doing this to please other people, or am I doing this because I really want to do it? And I still have to work on that. I don't know if that will ever go away. It's improved, but those are the things that I've personally had to work on. So that was part 1 of my interview. We'll be back in your ears with part 2 next week. Yes, back-to-back episodes. But before we wrap this one up, I reached out to Sari after we recorded and asked her if there was anything she wished she would have asked me, because I know when I interview people, there's always stuff that comes up. There's always, oh man, I wish I would have asked that. Or why didn't I ask that question? Sari replied to my email when I asked her that, and she gave me 4 questions. So I'm going to answer 2 of them now at the end of this episode and 2 more next time around. She asked, when you were a child and imagined what you wanted for your life, what kinds of things did you picture? So to answer this question, it's interesting to me because as far back as I can remember, I really truly pictured entrepreneurship, whether it was in like the form of always wanting to play with a cash register. And really what I truly wanted was an adding machine with the tape. Do you know what I'm talking about? We're going real old school here. That's what I always wanted so badly. And I don't know why. It probably all makes sense now as I like really have unpacked who I am and the way my brain works over the past few years. Or sometimes it was in the form of a woman in a business suit running her own business. And this makes me chuckle too, because now that I think of like business suit and briefcase, that's not me, right? I'm so much more of a casual entrepreneur. But at the time, that was the image I had in my mind. Since I've been working on myself and I reflect back a lot, I now realize that I chose a law enforcement career because of the security and consistent paycheck. And there's nothing wrong with that. I don't regret that decision. I think I've said that before on the podcast. But deep down, I always wanted to be my own boss. Always. The next question Sari sent me was, what are some ways Mamita instilled a sense of hope and possibility in you and your siblings? And when I thought about this one, I think there's a reason why this brand is called Savvy Shopkeeper, because Mamita taught us how to be savvy. Seeing what Mamita could do for us on such a fixed income always made me feel that if she could do that, I could do anything in any situation. Like I could always figure things out. And when you think that way, you're prone to think that you can do anything you want. Well, within reason, because if you ask my husband and Logan, they would say that doesn't include sports. Like, Kathy, you can't play sports. You just can't. And that's okay. So I think I would say I would give credit back to that. Those moments of she always figured stuff out and she still does. Even though we joke that she's truly spoiled, and that's okay too, I just know that I will, no matter what, I can figure things out. So we'll be back next week. Again, I want to remind you, we're doing back-to-back episodes for this next week with part 2 of this interview. Until then, you know what I'm going to say, be savvy and boss up.